Imagine your own son telling you straight up that you won't get a single penny from a $34 million fortune left by your ex-wife. Sounds heartbreaking, right? But what if I told you the lawyer actually laughed when he heard that? Today, I'm sharing the unbelievable story behind a massive fortune, a secret clause, and a family's fight to heal, all tied together by one shocking will. Stay with me. It was one of those moments that stays with you forever. The kind of moment you never see coming, no matter how much you think you're prepared for the worst. My son, who has always been honest with me, looked me straight in the eye and said something I wasn't ready to hear. He said, "Dad, you won't get a single penny from Mom's $34 million will." His words hit me like a thunderbolt. It was like the air was sucked out of the room. I froze for a moment, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Nothing? Not even a fraction? After all these years of shared history, of raising a family, of navigating through the storms of our broken marriage, was I really going to be left with absolutely nothing? It felt surreal, almost cruel. You see, my ex-wife's fortune wasn't something new to me. I knew she was wealthy, but $34 million. That was a number that made my head spin. It was enough money to change lives, to create opportunities, to build legacies. And yet here I was, being told by my own son that none of it would ever be mine. I wanted to ask my son why he was so sure. Did he see the will? Did he have some secret knowledge? Or was it just his gut feeling, shaped by years of witnessing the tension between his mother and me? Whatever the reason, his certainty was painful. It wasn't just the money. It was what that money symbolized. The acknowledgement, the respect, the possibility of closure. The silence between us felt heavy. I struggled to respond, not wanting to show how shaken I was. But inside, a storm was raging. Confusion, hurt, and yes, a little bit of anger. How could things have come to this? How could the mother of my child, the woman I had once loved deeply, decide to cut me out entirely? But the story didn't end there. Later, when I finally met with the lawyer who was handling my ex-wife's estate, everything changed. Or at least, my perspective did. When I told him what my son had said, the lawyer chuckled. Not in a mocking way, but as if he knew something I didn't. That laugh was unexpected, and it caught me off guard. He said, "Your son's not wrong to think you're cut out, but trust me, the will has some surprises." For a moment, I didn't understand what he meant. How could the lawyer say that after hearing my son's firm statement? What surprises could there possibly be? That day, sitting in that sterile office, my emotions were all over the place. I wanted to believe there was more to the story, but the fear of being truly excluded weighed heavily on my heart. I felt like I was caught between hope and reality, hoping for some fairness, some recognition, but bracing myself for disappointment. What followed was a deep dive into the pages of a document I never imagined would hold so much power over my future. The will, it turned out, wasn't as straightforward as I thought. It was carefully crafted, with clauses and conditions that reflected years of complex feelings, anger, regret, but also a strange kind of care. And so, that one simple sentence from my son, that I would get nothing, became the catalyst for a journey I never planned on taking. A journey to understand not just the legal terms of a will, but the deeper family dynamics it represented. It was a wake-up call to pay attention, to listen, and to prepare for what was to come. In the end, the lesson was clear. Inheritance isn't just about money. It's about the bonds we maintain, the forgiveness we offer, and the love we choose to give, even when it's hard. It's about recognizing that sometimes the greatest gifts aren't material at all. They're the moments of connection, understanding, and healing that bring us back together. As I move forward, I carry this lesson with me. I'm grateful for the challenge, the chance to grow, and the opportunity to rebuild my family. Because at the heart of it all, what truly matters isn't what we leave behind in dollars, but what we leave behind in love. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story inspiring or meaningful, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and helps me bring you more stories like this. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video. In the end, that shocking claim, the one that made me feel like an outsider in my own family's story, turned out to be just the beginning. The lawyer's laugh wasn't about mockery. It was about the unexpected twists that life and wills sometimes hold. And it was a reminder that sometimes the truth is more complicated than it first appears. Years ago, my ex-wife and I ended things on bitter terms, terms that neither of us could have imagined when we first started our life together. Our marriage, like many others, had its fair share of ups and downs. There were moments of laughter, hope, and dreams of a future together. But over time, those moments were overshadowed by misunderstandings, arguments, and a growing distance neither of us knew how to bridge. I remember the early days of our marriage, the excitement, the plans we made, the promises we whispered to each other. We were young, hopeful, and convinced that we could take on anything life threw at us. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Slowly, cracks began to show, fueled by differences we couldn't reconcile and emotions left unspoken. It wasn't easy admitting it, but eventually we both knew the marriage wasn't working. The process of divorce was nothing like the hopeful new beginnings we had once talked about. It was raw, painful, and emotionally draining. The fights weren't just about who said what or who did what wrong. They became battles for control, for fairness, for survival in a system neither of us wanted to fully embrace. We fought bitterly over everything. The assets we had accumulated, the custody of our son, and even the small things that suddenly felt monumental when your world is falling apart. Each conversation felt like walking on a tightrope, afraid that one wrong step would make everything collapse. The house that we had once called home became a battlefield, filled with silences and resentment. When the final papers were signed and the divorce was finalized, I left the house empty-handed. I didn't walk away with much. No fancy possessions, no big settlements. I thought that chapter of my life was finally closed and I could move on, free from the weight of the past. I told myself that what mattered most was my son and that I could rebuild my life from scratch. But her wealth? That was a different story altogether. Unlike me, she was fortunate to have substantial assets, investments, property, and a fortune that most people only dream of. I always knew she was financially well off, but the exact extent of her wealth wasn't something we discussed, especially during the divorce. It wasn't something I expected to be a part of my future anymore. In my mind, I believed that once we divorced, our lives would be completely separate. What she owned was hers, and what I had would be mine to build on my own. But as time passed and life unfolded, I realized that things weren't so simple. There were still connections, obligations, and even unspoken ties that money couldn't erase. It's strange how divorce changes your perspective on people. Not just your ex, but also your children, your family, and yourself. I often wondered how my ex-wife felt about me now. Was there regret? Resentment? Or had we simply become two strangers sharing fragments of a past? Those questions haunted me quietly. Through it all, my son was the one constant. He was the reason I kept going, the reason I tried to stay strong even when it felt like everything was falling apart. I wanted him to know that no matter what, his parents loved him, and that we would do our best to support him, even if we couldn't do it together. Little did I know that the past was not entirely behind us. The bitter divorce had left scars, yes, But it had also set the stage for a surprising twist, one that involved her $34 million fortune, a will, and a question of what I was truly entitled to. The story of that divorce wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about navigating the complicated legacy that comes after, a legacy I never expected to be a part of again. Little did I know that the past was not entirely behind us. The bitter divorce had left scars, yes, but it had also set the stage for a surprising twist, one that involved her $34 million fortune, a will, and a question of what I was truly entitled to. The story of that divorce wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about navigating the complicated legacy that comes after, a legacy I never expected to be a part of again. It was just an ordinary day when my phone rang, and on the other end was a voice I hadn't heard in years, the family lawyer who had handled my ex-wife's estate matters. The call was unexpected, and the moment I heard him speak, my heart started pounding in my chest. "Your ex-wife's will has been updated," he said casually, almost like he was talking about the weather. "There's $34 million in assets. I thought you might want to know." Those words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I sat there in stunned silence. $34 million. That was a figure I hadn't fully grasped before. It was a fortune, a life-changing amount of money. And yet, mixed with that shock was a swirling storm of emotions: curiosity, confusion, dread, and even a little hope. I wanted to ask immediately, is there anything for me? What does this mean for me? But I held back. I didn't know what the lawyer would say. Would he confirm the grim prediction my son had made? Or would there be something unexpected, a silver lining I hadn't seen coming? For years I'd told myself that after the bitter divorce, that chapter was closed. I left without much, but I believed that was my choice. To move on, to rebuild. I never imagined I would hear about her will again, let alone one that held such a massive sum. The idea that this wealth could somehow affect me felt surreal. As the lawyer continued, I learned that the will had been updated recently. It wasn't just a document tucked away gathering dust. It was active, alive, reflecting my ex-wife's final wishes and intentions. Hearing that made my mind race. What had changed? Why was I only hearing about this now? And most importantly, what did it mean for me? Curiosity gnawed at me. I wondered what kind of person she was at that moment when she updated the will. Was she thinking about our past? About our son? About me? The thought was both comforting and unsettling. Could there be a message behind this update? At the same time, dread crept in. Would the will confirm the worst? That I was to be excluded? That my son was right and I was to be left with nothing? I thought back to the years of tension, the fights, the cold silences. Did those years erase any chance I had of sharing in that fortune? The lawyer assured me that I wasn't being left completely out, but he didn't give me all the details right then. He said the best thing was to meet in person, to go through the will carefully, and to understand the full picture before jumping to conclusions. That was fair advice, but it didn't calm the storm of questions inside me. That call marked the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter I hadn't planned for, but one I knew I had to face. It forced me to confront my feelings about the past and the future. It made me realize that sometimes life doesn't end where we expect it to, and sometimes the past has a way of catching up with us when we least expect it. As I hung up the phone, I sat back and tried to process everything. This $34 million wasn't just a number. It was a symbol of everything we had been through and everything we still had to figure out. Was it a source of conflict, or could it be a way to heal old wounds? The answer wasn't clear yet, but one thing was certain. I needed to understand what this meant, not just legally, but for me, for my son, and for whatever family we still were or could become. After I received the startling news from the family lawyer about my ex-wife's updated will and the massive $34 million in assets, my first instinct was to share it with my son. He's the one person in the world I've always trusted, my flesh and blood, my connection to the past, and my hope for the future. I thought maybe, just maybe, this news could bring some light, some hope, or at the very least, some clarity. But his reaction was the last thing I expected. When I told him about the will and the fortune, his face grew serious, almost pained. He shook his head slowly, his eyes fixed on mine, as if he was preparing me for bad news. And then he said it, words that hit me like a punch to the gut. "Dad, you'll get nothing. Mom's always been careful about that. She's made sure you're cut out completely." Hearing those words from my son was one of the most painful moments I've ever experienced. It wasn't just the idea that I might get nothing. It was the certainty in his voice, the way he seemed so sure about it. How could he be so sure? After all, he's my son. He's grown up with me, seen the struggles I've faced, and known the complexities between his mother and me. But to hear him say it like it was a fact, that I was completely written out of this chapter, shook me deeply. I wanted to ask him how he knew. Did he see the will? Had his mother told him something? Or was it just his way of protecting me from false hope? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that my son's words probably came from years of observing the tension and distance between his mother and me. He had grown up watching the way we avoided each other, the silent walls we built, and the unresolved conflicts that lingered in the background. In a way, his grim prediction felt like a reflection of reality, a reality I hadn't wanted to face. For years after the divorce, my ex-wife and I lived separate lives, and it often felt like we were strangers rather than parents trying to co-parent. The bitterness from the divorce hadn't completely faded, and I suspected that the wounds ran deeper than I'd allowed myself to admit. But despite all that, part of me refused to accept his words without question. I believed there was more to the story. Could she really exclude me entirely? After all, we shared a child, a family history, and memories that couldn't simply be erased by a will. His certainty made me question everything, not just about the will, but about our relationship. Had I been too distant? Had I missed chances to repair what was broken? Was I really that much of an outsider in my own family story? At the same time, I understood where my son was coming from. He wanted to prepare me, to shield me from disappointment. And maybe, deep down, he was hoping for a miracle too. That conversation stayed with me long after it ended. It made me realize how complicated family dynamics can be, how even those closest to us can carry heavy burdens and painful truths. And it made me more determined to find out the real story behind that will. Because whether or not my son was right, I knew one thing for sure. I needed to hear it from the source, the lawyer, the will itself, before I could accept any conclusion. In the end, that moment with my son was both heartbreaking and motivating. It was a reminder of the stakes involved, but also of the hope that sometimes lies beneath even the darkest predictions. And it was the beginning of a journey to uncover the truth, to face the past, and maybe, just maybe, to find a way forward. As I sat in the lawyer's office, my nerves were tangled with anticipation and dread. The atmosphere felt heavy, almost like the moment was suspended in time. The lawyer, calm and collected, pulled out the will, that dense, formal document I'd imagined many times but never truly seen in detail. He spread the pages on the desk and began to flip through them with a practiced hand. Then he stopped and pointed to a specific part of the document. "See this?" he said, tapping a paragraph with his pen. "This is a special provision your ex-wife included years ago. It's not something most people would notice on a quick read, but it's important." My heart skipped a beat. The idea that there was something hidden, something unexpected, gave me a glimmer of hope. I leaned in, eager to hear more. The lawyer continued, "This clause says you will inherit a portion of her estate, but it's tied to one very specific condition." My mind raced. What condition? Was it something impossible to fulfill? Was it a way to give a token share? Or was there real intention behind it? I listened closely, hanging on to every word. The lawyer explained that the clause was carefully crafted. It wasn't just about handing over money, but about encouraging something deeper: cooperation, communication, and a willingness to put the past behind us, at least for the sake of our son. The condition was designed to bring us together rather than keep us apart. "You see," the lawyer said, "she wanted to ensure that the inheritance wouldn't just be a financial transaction. It was meant to motivate both of you to engage in a meaningful relationship, not necessarily a friendship, but at least a cooperative partnership in raising your son and supporting him." Hearing this, I felt a mixture of emotions: surprise, relief, and even a little guilt. The clause wasn't just a cold legal safeguard, it was a message, a challenge, and perhaps a chance for healing. My ex-wife, despite everything, wanted there to be some connection, some form of unity, even after all the bitterness of the past. The condition, the lawyer said, involved participating in regular family meetings, making joint decisions about our son's future, and maintaining a respectful line of communication. If those conditions were met, I would receive a significant share of the inheritance. If not, that share would be redirected elsewhere. This explained a lot. It explained why my son was so sure I'd get nothing if we remained distant and disconnected. It explained why the will had stayed a secret for so long. It wasn't just about money. It was about values and relationships. I sat back, trying to process it all. This clause wasn't a punishment or an obstacle. It was an invitation to step up, to be involved, and to show that despite our fractured past, we could still come together for something greater than ourselves. The lawyer smiled softly and said, "Your ex-wife wasn't trying to punish you or cut you out completely. She was trying to protect your son's future. And in doing so, she left a door open for you." That moment changed everything. It shifted my perspective from defeat to determination. The inheritance was no longer just about money. It was about family, responsibility, and perhaps reconciliation. I realized that the clause was more than a legal technicality. It was a lifeline, a chance to rebuild bridges that years of hurt had burned down, and most importantly, it was a sign that even in the most complicated family stories, there can be hope. When the lawyer began to explain the condition tied to the inheritance, I braced myself for something complicated, something full of legal jargon and technicalities that would make it nearly impossible to meet. But to my surprise, the condition was both simple and deeply meaningful, a testament to the complicated love and hope my ex-wife still carried for our family, despite everything. He looked at me with a calm expression and said, "The condition your ex-wife set was straightforward, but profound in its intention. She wanted to make sure that if you and she could work together for your son's benefit, then you would receive your share of the inheritance. It's essentially a way to encourage cooperation, not just between you two, but for the sake of your son's future." His words struck a chord deep inside me. It was as if the years of distance, silence, and bitterness between us were being challenged by a simple human desire, that our son's well-being would come first. This wasn't just a legal document. It was a message from my ex-wife, a reminder that family, even fractured family, still mattered. The lawyer chuckled softly and added, "She wasn't interested in keeping you apart because of anger or spite. Quite the opposite. She wanted to make sure that no matter what had happened between you two, the family stayed connected, because in the end, what mattered most was the bond you all share." I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. There was relief, knowing that she hadn't shut the door completely. There was hope, that maybe this was a chance to heal some of the wounds that time hadn't been able to fix. But there was also a weight, the realization that this inheritance came with responsibility, and that the past couldn't be ignored if I wanted to claim what was meant to be mine. The condition required both of us to make an effort, to communicate, to coordinate decisions about our son's education, health, and future plans. It was a legal nudge, pushing us to put aside old grievances and focus on what truly mattered. If we failed to meet this condition, then the inheritance portion would be redirected, likely to charities or other family members. The lawyer's explanation made me reflect on the years we had spent apart, the missed calls, the avoided conversations, the silent dinners when our son was caught in the middle. How many opportunities had we lost to work together? How many moments had been wasted on resentment? But hearing this condition also made me realize something important. It's never too late to try, to reach out, to build bridges. The clause wasn't just about money. It was about connection, about giving us a reason and a legal obligation to put family first. I asked the lawyer if there was a timeline or a specific way to prove that we were cooperating. He explained that it wasn't rigid. It was about consistent effort, attending meetings, sharing important decisions, and demonstrating good faith in co-parenting. It was less about perfection and more about genuine intention. That gave me hope. It meant that despite all the hurt and anger, there was room for change, room for us to step up, for me to step up, and for my ex-wife to see that I was willing to put the past behind me for the sake of our son. As I left the lawyer's office that day, the condition weighed on my mind, but it also lifted a burden I hadn't fully acknowledged before. The inheritance was more than just money. It was a chance to heal, to reconnect, and to show that even broken families can find a way forward. And deep down, I knew that if I could meet this condition, the real reward wouldn't just be the inheritance. It would be the chance to rebuild a family that had been fractured for too long. When I finally sat down with my son and shared the news about the unexpected clause in my ex-wife's will, his reaction was nothing short of surprising. Up until that moment, he had been so certain that I was completely cut out of the inheritance, so certain that the idea of me receiving anything felt like a distant dream. But when I told him, "There's a condition, and if met, I will get a portion of the estate," his eyes widened in disbelief. For a moment, silence hung between us, heavy but hopeful. Then, slowly, a flicker of hope sparked in his gaze. "So you will get something?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It was as if, for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to imagine a different reality, one where the family wasn't completely divided by money or past mistakes. I nodded slowly, feeling a mix of relief and responsibility flood through me. "Yes," I said carefully, "but it's not just about the money." I wanted him to understand that this inheritance wasn't a simple transaction. It was a symbol of something deeper, something far more important than wealth. "It's about us coming together," I explained, "not just for the inheritance, but for you, for your future, for your well-being. This condition my mom put in the will, it's her way of encouraging us to cooperate, to be involved in your life and decisions." I looked into his eyes and saw a new understanding growing. For so long, the tension between my ex-wife and me had created a divide, and I knew my son often felt caught in the middle. I wanted him to know that despite all the past difficulties, I was ready to make things better for him. The clause was more than a legal stipulation. It was a chance to build something new, something better. My son looked thoughtful, almost overwhelmed by the weight of what I was saying. I could see the questions in his eyes, questions about whether things could really change, whether our family could be whole again, even if only in small ways. I know things haven't been easy, I continued softly, but this is an opportunity, a chance for all of us to work together, for your sake, and for what's best for you. I wanted him to feel hopeful, to believe that despite the scars of the past, there was a way forward. His expression softened, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a genuine connection between us. He reached out and squeezed my hand, a small but powerful gesture that said more than words ever could. That moment was a turning point. It reminded me that family isn't just about shared history or even money. It's about showing up for each other, especially when things are hard. It's about forgiveness, communication, and the willingness to try, even when it feels impossible. My son's reaction made me realize how much he wanted us to find a way, not just for the inheritance, but because he believed, deep down, that families could heal, that we could heal. As we talked longer, I promised him that I would do whatever it took to meet the conditions and to be the father he deserved. And more importantly, that I wanted to build a future where money wasn't the barrier, but the bridge. Walking away from that conversation, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The inheritance was no longer just about dollars and cents. It was about mending relationships, creating stability, and making sure my son knew he was the center of it all. Sometimes, life gives us unexpected chances to fix what's broken and to come together stronger than before. For me, this was one of those moments. And seeing the hope flicker in my son's eyes was the greatest reward of all. That day marked a turning point for all of us. Something shifted in the air, a subtle but profound change that none of us expected, but all of us needed. For years, money had been a source of tension and division, a cold, hard barrier that kept us apart. But suddenly, I saw it for what it truly was, not just wealth or assets, but a symbol of family, respect, and the possibility of healing old wounds. When my ex-wife's will was first brought to my attention, it felt like a final chapter closing on a difficult story. I expected it to be a source of conflict or disappointment. Instead, it became a bridge, a connection that invited us to come together, to speak honestly, and to rediscover what had been lost in the years of silence and separation. That afternoon, sitting down with my ex-wife and our son, the atmosphere was different. There was no hostility, no resentment hanging heavy in the room. Instead, there was a quiet willingness to listen, to understand, and to begin conversations that had long been avoided. For the first time in years, we talked openly, honestly, and with a sense of hope. We talked about the past, not to rehash old arguments, but to acknowledge the pain and high stakes we had all carried. We shared memories of better times, reminding ourselves that beneath the hurt and disappointment, there was still a foundation of love and shared history. It was a healing process, slow and sometimes uncomfortable, but necessary. What surprised me most was how much we all wanted this, the chance to rebuild, to respect one another, and to put our son's future above old grudges. The money, which once seemed like a wedge driving us apart, now felt like a tool to bring us together. It was a reminder that family isn't just about blood or legal documents. It's about respect, understanding, and a commitment to stand by one another, no matter the difficulties. The lawyer's clause in the will wasn't just about encouraging cooperation. It was about inspiring us to redefine what family meant for us. It challenged us to move beyond the bitterness of the past and to create something new, something stronger. It was as if my ex-wife, through her final wishes, was giving us a roadmap to healing. In that moment, I realized how much power family holds. The power to hurt, yes, but also the power to heal, to forgive, and to grow. It reminded me that wealth alone cannot buy peace or happiness, but the strength of family ties can overcome even the deepest wounds. Our conversations that day opened doors I hadn't dared to knock on before. We talked about how we could work together to support our son, how we could communicate better, and how we could respect each other's roles in his life. It was a fresh start, filled with challenges, but also with promise. I felt a renewed sense of responsibility, not just as a father, but as a member of a family that needed to rebuild trust and understanding. The power of family isn't always easy to see when pain and conflict cloud the view, but when you step back and focus on what truly matters, it becomes clear. This experience taught me that money, while important, is secondary to the bonds we share. It's those bonds that carry us through hardships and make the victories sweeter. It's those bonds that help us heal when life breaks us apart. From that day forward, I committed myself to nurturing those bonds, to being present, to communicating honestly, and to respecting the past while building a better future. Because family, in its truest form, is about love, respect, and the courage to heal together. And as I looked at my son and my ex-wife, I knew that despite the struggles we had faced, the power of family could guide us toward a new beginning, one filled with hope, forgiveness, and the strength to move forward together. Sometimes, life delivers moments that feel like a final blow, moments that shake you to your core and make you question everything you thought you knew. For me, hearing that I might be cut out of my ex-wife's $34 million fortune felt exactly like that. It was a punch to the gut, a harsh reminder of a past filled with pain and separation. But as the story unfolded, and as I reflected on the journey that followed, I realized that what seemed like an ending was actually a profound lesson in love, unity, and the true meaning of family. When my son told me, with absolute certainty, that I would get nothing from the will, his words stung deeply. His conviction wasn't just about the money. It was about the story we had lived, the distance that had grown between us, and the wounds that had never quite healed. His words felt like a final verdict, a sentence handed down by someone I loved more than anything in this world. Then came the lawyer's laugh, a moment I will never forget. It was a laugh that caught me off guard, a laugh that seemed to say, "There's more to this story than you realize." That laugh was a turning point. It made me realize that inheritance isn't just about dollar signs and property. It's about relationships, responsibilities, and the ties that bind us, even when we think those ties are broken beyond repair. The inheritance clause that tied my share to cooperation with my ex-wife was more than a legal technicality. It was a challenge to rise above past hurts, to set aside pride, and to work together for the sake of something greater, our son. That clause was a reminder that family isn't just about what's on paper. It's about the actions we take, the respect we show, and the love we nurture, even in difficult circumstances. This experience taught me that money can never replace the value of connection. No fortune can heal a fractured relationship if we don't put in the effort to understand, forgive, and grow. It made me see that inheritance, in its truest sense, is about legacy. The legacy we leave not just in assets, but in love and unity. Looking back, I realized that my son's harsh words were a wake-up call. They forced me to face uncomfortable truths about the past, about my own shortcomings, and about the work needed to rebuild trust. And the lawyer's laugh reminded me to keep an open mind, to expect the unexpected, and to believe that there's always more beneath the surface. Through this journey, I learned that family can be complicated, messy, and painful, but it can also be beautiful, healing, and strong. Sometimes, what seems like a final blow is actually an invitation to start over, to reconnect, and to build something new from the pieces that remain. I also learned the importance of hope that even in the darkest moments, there is a chance for reconciliation and growth. That hope gave me the strength to embrace the condition in the will, to reach out, and to commit to being a better father and family member.